So in this video, we're going to be reviewing how to solve one and two-step equations. And what I want to point out first is that highlighted here in green, we have a series of equations that are only going to require one step for us to solve. Meanwhile, down here in yellow, we can see that because we have two terms in our algebraic expression, there's going to be two things involved for us to undo that. So these are going to be two-step equations. While up here in green, since there's only one term in our algebraic expression, they're only going to require one step. Okay? All right, so back at the top real quick, what I want to point out is that to just simplify, when you're multiplying fractions here, to take a third of 9, I'm going to use a visual here, and I'm going to say, okay, so 9, I'm going to break 9 up into 3 parts. That means each one must be worth 3. And if we take a third one of them, it's going to be worth 3. So up here, you can just do 9 divided by 3, which is 3 times 1, and that's the answer. All right, now for this next one, I'm going to take the 25 and break it up into fifths. So that means each one here must be worth 5. Now if I want 3 of those fifths, I'm going to get 15. And friendly reminder, since we have a negative number times a positive, this would be a negative 15. And last but not least, if I take 24 and break it up into thirds, 24 divided by 3, that's going to be 8. And now times the 2, we want 2 of them, so this is going to be a 16. You do have the option to do 24 times 2, which is 48, and then do 48 divided by 3, and you'd still get a 16. Now I want to remind you guys also with vocab that a coefficient is a number which multiplies a variable. A number which multiplies a variable. And you're going to see down here when we're solving why we wanted to review this fraction math, because now we're dealing with coefficients that are fractions. So in this first equation right here, we have 1/2 of some number x equals 12. If I take half of some number, it equals 12. Now I want to remind you guys that the goal is for this coefficient to be a 1. So that's why we multiply by the reciprocal, because 2 over 2 cancels out. And what we do on one side, we've got to do to the other. So on this side, 12 times 2 is going to be 24. We do not need to write the 1 as a coefficient because 1 times x is just x. So right here, 1/2 x, we multiplied both sides by 2 over 1. We multiplied by the reciprocal, and we got a 24. Now where it says to check your work, we're just going to take half of 24. And right here, 24 divided by 2 would be 12 times 1, and we do get a 12, like we were supposed to. So you can see right here why we're actually, why we reviewed the multiplying math with a fraction, because that's going to come in with our check step. All right, let's move over to the next one. So we've got a third of some number x equals 10. So there's some number out there, when I took a third of it, it would be 10. So to get the right answer here, we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal, because that cancels out over here. And so now on this side, we're going to multiply 10 times 3 over 1. Now, since it's just over 1, we don't even need to write that, and you can just think of it as 10 times 3, which would be 30. All right, so to check, we just want to take a third of 30 and see if it's 10. And when we do the 30 divided by 3, we get 10 times 1, and that is, in fact, a 10. Okay? All right, so at this point, you're probably catching on here. What we do to get rid of the fraction, we just multiply both sides by its reciprocal. So for this one, 4th times 4 over 1, that cancels out. So over here, 3 times 4 is 12. On this side, a fifth of x is a negative 4, so we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of 5 over 1. And friendly reminder that a negative 4 times 5, this one's going to be a negative 20. Make sure you get negative 20 with that one. And for this one here, now when we've got a 2/3, the reciprocal of that is 3/2, so that cancels out over here. And so you've got 6 divided by 2, which is 3, times 3 is 9. Another method here is to do 6 times 3, which is 18, and 18 divided by 2 would be 9. Now to check the work here, I am going to check just because we have a 2/3 and a 9. We think that x would be 9. All right, so let's check to see if we do 9 divided by 3, well, that's 3, times 2. We do get a 6 when we simplify that, and so that is right. And now for this one over here, we've got a negative 3/4 as our coefficient. So since our coefficient is a negative 3/4, we're going to multiply both sides by its reciprocal, the negative 4/3. That cancels out over here. Negative times negative is a positive 1. And over here, since 16 is not divisible by 3, my little trick won't work. If you do 16 divided by 3, that's going to be a decimal. So for this one, when we do 16 times the negative 4, we're going to get a negative 64 as our numerator, and then we'll just put over 3. And this is the first one that you guys are seeing here that's going to have a fraction for an answer. A lot of times when this happens, as of now, you're going to think that you're doing something wrong, but everything's right. And let's take a look. If we have the negative 3/4 as our coefficient over here, we're plugging in this answer, the negative 64 over 3. Let's simplify that and see what we get. So you can do numerator times numerator and then denominator times denominator, or just catch that 3 divided by 3 is 1. And now 64 over 4 is what we're left with, 64 over 4. And this, let's say that like you've got a negative here and a negative here. So the negative with the negative, that's the positive 16. So it does work out. Okay? So for this one, this is our first answer. We're going to leave it as an improper fraction so that when we plug it in, the math is easy to check. You could take the time to make it a mixed number, but then when you're checking, you have to use the improper fraction anyways, so we're going to leave it as this. All right, and now here's the big main deal, the 2 highlighted problems down here that are yellow. Here's the difference. As I mentioned earlier, we have one term, and this time we actually have a constant as well. None of these equations up here in green had constants, and that's why they were considered one-step equations here in green. But now down here, because we have constants, first we need to get rid of the constant. And friendly reminder, that's because in PEMDAS, that would be the last thing we do, and you're going to see that here actually in our check step. You'll see that minusing the 4 was the last thing that we did. So this is back to drop the line, and since we have a negative constant here of 4, I added 4 to both sides, so that cancels out, and 1 plus 4 is this 5. Now I'm left with a 1/5 y, and we've already discussed what to do with a fraction that's a coefficient. So now we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal so that this cancels out, and we're left with just y. And on this side, 5 times 5 would be the 25. So when we check, what I meant was when you plug in this 25 right here for y, and then say, okay, so now we have to subtract 4. First thing you're going to do is take 1/5 of 25. 25 divided by 5, that's going to be 5, and then you take away the 4, and that's 1. So taking away 4 was the last thing we did here in PEMDAS, so that's going to be the first thing that we undo here. So getting rid of the constants, the first thing that you want to do always, but we didn't have to worry about that up here with these green equations. All right, and so now we have a negative 1/4 a minus 6, and since our constant's a negative 6, we're adding 6 to both sides for that to cancel out, and 4 plus 6 is 10. Now since I have a negative 1/4 as my coefficient, we're going to multiply both sides by its reciprocal, a negative 4 over 1. So that cancels out over here. Negative times negative is my positive 1 that I want for my coefficient of a. And on this side, 10 times the negative 4 over 1, you don't even need to write the 1 even anymore. That's going to be your negative 40. And when we check, we're going to take a negative 1/4 of a negative 40, and we're going to take away 6. And we want to see if that's 4. So a negative times negative is positive, and 1/4 of 40 is in fact 10. And when we do 10 minus the 6, we get 4, just like we were supposed to. So now I want you to flip over, please, to page 12. And there's problems up here. There's 6 problems for you to try on your own. And I want you to actually try them on your own and see if you get the right answers. And when you hit play, we'll go over them. All right, so real quick, let's see how you did with these. For the first 2, you should have gotten 12. And for number 3, you should have gotten a 20. Now, I do want to make sure here for number 4 that I go over this with you guys. So when we drop the line, the constant is on this side, and it's a 15. It's a positive number. So you want to subtract 15 from both sides, and that'll cancel out. And you've got to bring down this negative 1/3 m. That's what you're bringing down here, okay? Now, since you have a coefficient that's a fraction, we multiply both sides by its reciprocal. And what I did was I used the commutative property to just rewrite this multiplication to show you right here that that's the coefficient that now cancels out to become just the 1 for this m. So we just have to multiply both sides by this reciprocal, a negative 3 over 1. So on this side, a negative 12 times a negative 3 is a negative 36, or positive, excuse me, positive 36. So for this one, we get 36 for m. All right. For number 5 here, you should have gotten a negative 12, and so when you subtract the 4, that canceled out, and then you have a denominator here that's a negative 3, and since your denominator is a negative 3, we're multiplying both sides by that for it to cancel out, and we get k is negative 12. And last but not least for this one, it was back to just being a one step. And for this one step, since that's the reciprocal, the negative 1/4 has a reciprocal of negative 4 over 1, that cancels out. And on this side, a negative 4 times a negative 4 is a positive 16. Now, the last thing that I wanted to do with you guys here was to just discuss real quick, is there another way to write a fourth x equals 5? And there sure is. 1 times x in the numerator is just x, and then you can just put divided by 4. So taking a fourth of something is the same thing as dividing it by 5. And you can see that with both of these equations to solve. Here you're multiplying by 4 over 1. Here you're multiplying by 4 over 1. Well, 4 over 1 is the exact same thing as on this equation when you'd multiply by the denominator of 4. So these equations would be the same. This green equation is the same as seeing a 1/4 x. And it doesn't matter how you see these problems, we're going to get x equals 20 for this one. And last but not least in this video here, if you see x divided by 2, that's the same thing as seeing a 1/2 x equals negative 4. And for both of these, what you'd do is you'd multiply by this denominator of 2. And here the reciprocal is a 2 over 1, which is the same thing. So the negative 4 times 2, x here would be a negative 8. And that concludes the video on pages 11 and 12. Or sorry, yeah, 11 and 12. Thank you.